and I'm Gabe Monroe.
We're here to discuss politics, the whole impeachment process, everything that you've been seeing on the news for the past weeks, several weeks, months, and all of those things that really concern you that you might want to learn a little bit more about.
Yeah, absolutely.
So every time you turn on your television, Gabe, you see something about impeachment or the president, what's going on in Congress. What's your opinion on those things?
Oh man, I tell you, it's for the person that doesn't know a whole lot about it, it can be very confusing.
Right.
Man, it's crazy. When we look at what's going on, there's three main channels. I mean, you've got Fox News, you've got CNN and MSNBC. Those are kind of the three main ones that people are kind of focusing in on and listening. And then the topics of conversation around the water cooler are all over the place.
Yeah. Now, have you noticed that when you watch, say, for example, Fox, like you mentioned them, or you flip from Fox to CNN and watch the difference between those, it almost seems like you see two different viewpoints.
Oh, it's definitely. It's always, when you look at different viewpoints there, it seems that Fox News kind of follows more of the Republican side, and CNN, I guess they're kind of like a neutral, and the MSNBC is definitely the left side. So it's one of those things where you can kind of figure out, depending upon, what you're watching,
exactly,
what side they're for or against.
Right, right. Most people see these programs on the news and they see how they'll always refer to it as impeachment and removal of the president.
Absolutely.
But what a lot of people aren't aware of is that it's a process involved with that. It's not just impeachment. People are thinking that as soon as those articles of impeachment are written up, he's gone, and that's not how it works.
No, not at all, not at all. There's, we look back at, the Clinton administration and then back in Nixon administration, and there's a couple. So those are some of the more popular ones that we see and we hear about. And during the Clinton administration, when the impeachment process went, he actually finished out his term.
Exactly.
President Nixon at that time, he resigned prior to. So, we're looking to see what's going on here. This is definitely something that's very interesting.
Right. And so along those lines, a lot of people are assuming that impeachment and removal are the same thing, but the process is a lot more complicated than that. Actually, when articles of impeachment are brought against a sitting president, he actually has to be indicted in order to be removed from office. And that'll be a lot more complicated than people think it is, because the articles of impeachment move from the House of Representatives onto the Senate, and that's where the rubber hits the road.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was listening this morning a little bit about some of the things that Mitch McConnell was saying, and it was one of those, he's like, well, if they bring it, then we're going to have to do something about it. So it's one of those things that when you look and you see a little bit of what's going on and kind of how it is, even with the House being majority Democrat, and then the Senate, like you were saying, is majority Republican. It's one of those things where it's going to be a fight. I can definitely see that coming. It's going to be a big one. So we'll see what happens.
It's going to definitely dominate the news cycle, and I think people should be more familiar with the process, and also the fact that it's going to affect the election next year. It's going to affect everything down to our local levels of government.
Oh, absolutely. I think when you're talking about affecting things, it's one of those things when you look at just how the whole process is going to work. If you definitely fill us in, how's that process going to work?
Right. So with there being 100 members of the Senate, the U.S. Senate, you have 53 of them being Republican, affiliated with the GOP. You have 2 independents, and then the other 45 would be Democrats. So the chances of those Republicans that mainly support Donald Trump because he did run as the GOP candidate, the chances of any of them flipping as far as voting toward removal of the president, the chances are pretty slim.
Right. It seems that way. Definitely seems that way.
But one thing that I would encourage people to remember is that Black people, we as African Americans, are not a monolith, meaning that we don't all think the same way. So you have friends, I'm sure you know people that might not admit it, but there are a lot of conservative Black Republicans out there who might have or might vote for Donald Trump. So the important thing I encourage people to do is gather their facts.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, you need to make sure you gather your facts.
Okay, we have to take a break for a minute. We'll be right back, myself and Gabe on the interview. Hello, we're back on the interview. I'm here with Gabe. My name is Sherman. And I wanted to ask you a question. Between the Democratic and Republican parties, like what do you see are their similarities and differences?
Well, I mean, some of the things that I look at with them being similar, obviously they both somewhat care about the country, right? And they kind of want to get some things pushed forward together. But there are a lot of different things that, especially when you look at the new I guess people that are coming in, right? They're, I guess we could call the new candidates.
Exactly.
Sorry, some loss of words. So the new candidates for this upcoming 2020 election, it seems like some of the stuff that they're running on, obviously they want some sort of gun reform. I totally agree with that. That makes sense. There needs to be some sort of universal background checks or something. We don't need a bunch of crazies out there running around with guns, right? When we look at what's going on in the world with climate change, those are some things right there that they make a lot of sense. I mean, there's things that we have to look at. Obviously, there was a world that was going on millions of years before we got here.
True.
And it seems like it's going to probably be millions of years after we leave here.
Right.
So we want to obviously do some different things so that I definitely want my grandkids and grandkids to be able to live in a world that I'm at least living in now, where I can breathe clean air and drink water. I mean, you got what's going on in Flint and what's going on in New Jersey, right? So you look at all that stuff, it's like crazy. You can't even drink water.
A lot of environmental
That's crazy stuff. So, when we look at those types of things, those are things that are definitely hot topics, right? This Green New Deal. When we look at the Republican Party, a lot of the Republican Party, they seem to me like they're trying to become self-sufficient as far as like what we do. We're not relying so much on the Saudis and a lot of the Middle Eastern countries on oil. We're doing a lot more drilling around here offshore, trying to do some stuff out in Alaska and in the Caribbean. It's a lot of different things where we're just trying to become a little bit more self-sufficient. And it seems like it's by any means necessary, right? So when we look at that, I mean that it rubs a lot of people. So there's some things where they're kind of clashing because when we look at all these different things, the whole natural gas thing, going on up in the Pennsylvania area, West Virginia, and all these different things where they're finding all this natural gas,
fracking,
and right. So those are some different things. So what do you do with the waste? Those are all hot topics. So, as we get into this 2020 election and what these guys are going to be running on, it's going to heat up. It's going to be crazy. So.
A lot. And speaking of the news cycle and how this election is going to happen, it's interesting how like historically black people have always, or African Americans have always voted Democratic.
Right.
For 60, 70 odd years, for generations.
Right.
And things are changing to the point where you see the way things are portrayed, especially in the media, and you actually miss some of the things that are happening in real life, like in the legislation and in Congress especially. For example, Bill Clinton was a beloved president. He went on Arsenio Hall's show, played the saxophone.
Right.
Everybody loved him.
I do remember that.
Yep.
Yes.
And at the same time, our former Vice President Joe Biden, that was under Barack Obama, was writing a crime bill that locked up scores, thousands, hundreds of thousands of young African Americans that were nonviolent drug offenders.
Totally remember that.
But people are still stuck on voting Democratic when they haven't looked at, the fact that Donald Trump actually did a lot for prison reform recently with the First Step bill.
Yes, he
the
did.
optics are strange because you see a candidate or as president now and see how he acts and talks, and it rubs you the wrong way. But then when you look at what's actually been done on the books, I mean, it's crazy to think that Donald Trump's done more for prison reform than Bill Clinton.
Yeah, it did. That's kind of when you look at that. I do remember at the time. I think I was in the military, and there was the 3 strike deal that they had going on. So back in the early '90s, with that 1 strike, 2 strike, 3 strike, it locked up scores and scores, like you said, of African Americans. So when you look at that and you look at how things are shaking out. And what we actually go on, the GOP party or the Republican Party was actually years and years ago the party of African Americans.
True.
Right. So now how we got from there to where we are now in a lot of the different things that are going on, it makes no sense to me that we would just kind of go and just go along with what's been happening.
Exactly.
Right? Without doing right before we took the break, we were talking, do your homework. You know, do your homework and check your facts and make sure you're doing what you do and just vote with your mind. Right? Not necessarily with your heart or what you think.
Too many people make decisions based off of emotion.
Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
It is
Yes, sir.
that's politics.
So with that being politics, I like that. So with that being the case, I encourage people to, like we said, look at the facts and also realize that, you don't want to be taken for granted. I'm sure there are a lot of politicians out there who might be Democratic, might take the black vote for granted, the African American vote, thinking, hey, look at my party, I'm going to do what's best for you.
Absolutely.
But really, I think on a case-by-case basis, especially with local elections, that people should look at both candidates regardless of party, maybe even split vote, just pick whichever candidate you think is better for whichever issues that you want to have addressed.
Absolutely. I think that was one of Secretary Clinton's biggest mistakes is I think she possibly did take the African American vote for granted and didn't spend a lot of time in some of those areas where she needed to spend time.
Yes, sir.
And it shows if you just look at the Senate seat in Alabama, where we just had, it's been years and years and years of Republicans running that Senate seat, and it was overturned this year. And it was crazy because he didn't take that African American vote for granted. He went out there, beat the streets, and look at what happened. So it's one of those things that we have to definitely look at and make sure we do our homework, make sure that we're not just voting emotionally. We're actually doing our due diligence, checking out these candidates and what they actually stand for. And if they hit home with what you want, definitely vote there. But if not, then that's kind of there. So it looks like we're going to get ready to take another break here, but we'll be right back on the interview.
At least 5 people are dead.
All right, welcome back, Lake County. We're back with the interview, myself and Sherman. We're going to talk a little bit about some hot topics. So let's talk about this border wall thing going on. What do you think about the border wall?
I think it's not going to do exactly what the desired effect is. I think it's more of a statement, to be honest. I'm not sure if they can really stop the flow of immigrants, even drugs, really. I mean, there's a certain amount of influx that's going to happen that I think the government allows. I believe that, the current administration, they have to keep their base happy.
Absolutely.
And one thing that, definitely fires up their base is making sure that there are no illegal aliens coming over, taking their jobs. That's the rhetoric that's generally used.
Right. Yeah, usually when you look at how that whole thing kind of just gets started, and it's definitely a hot topic, considering that we have so many Hispanic Americans here in this Lake County area.
Oh, definitely.
It's one of those things where, no one wants to see, ICE raids or any of that stuff going on, because there are a lot of people here that almost everybody here is some sort of immigrant, right? There are some that were brought here against their will, and there were some that just came here.
Yes, sir.
But when we look at it, we're all here, right? We all need to kind of get along and figure out how this is going to work, how we're going to kind of make this world work. We looked at that. Some of the latest and greatest of things that they were just talking about with this border wall and the hundreds of miles of wall being constructed. Whether or not people believe that, I mean, it's kind of it's up to them. I don't know what the whole moat and the snakes and alligators and
flesh-piercing spikes.
Oh my gosh, what is this?
I think it's an attempt to placate his base. I guess you have to. There's an election cycle actually about to begin soon. The primaries are coming up.
Yes.
And I think it's going to make some people in Middle America, especially,
yes,
feel better about voting for their candidate, because they'll, won't have to worry about all of the illegal immigrants overrunning the American people.
Well, exactly. So one of the next hot topics that's been kind of brewing is gun control. What do you think?
Personally, I like guns.
Right.
Being from Missouri, pretty much everybody would hunt or at least had some sort of rifle. I mean, we weren't walking around with weapons of war like assault rifles that are available to people at Walmart these days. But I would definitely encourage African Americans to register weapons that they have, not walk around with anything unregistered because, of course, that's an instant felony.
Right.
But there's an alternative to the NRA. There is, a large and growing community gun club that's African American. And, when you look at how the NRA is able to affect the government as a lobby,
Yes.
as a lobbying force,
Yes.
I think that would be a great way for African Americans to consolidate their power.
Right, absolutely. I think a lot of the different things you were just talking about, Sherman, it makes a lot of sense. Take advantage of your Second Amendment rights if that's something that you so desire to do. I don't think that we necessarily need to walk around with weapons of war, with
Right.
AR-15s and AK-47s. I mean,
Right.
but the conceal and carry, this is something that's in the last, 3 to 5 years that the state of Illinois has adopted. We're probably one of the last states to kind of
Last
adopt
one.
that.
You're right,
And,
last one.
I'm originally from Florida, so, I totally agree. I'm a country boy, so that's just kind of what my grandfather and what we did. We grew up hunting. And with that and some of the other things, I mean, it's all right. Utilize your right if you're able to. Definitely, I discourage anybody that's a felon. Don't walk around with that's not good, because that you're going back. I promise you, it's not going to happen for you. One of those things that we look at with gun control, with the border wall stuff going on. The other thing is climate change. Like, where are you at with climate change?
I'm thinking, well, when you look at how polar ice caps are melting,
Yes.
how the Earth is changing permanently,
Yes.
it's strange because if you ever talk to a man that's, in his 80s or 90s even, they'll say that they've seen these weather patterns before. We don't know, but I mean, for example, last year we had several polar vortex blasts where, the temperature dropped to -35, -40.
Yes.
And me personally, I haven't seen weather like that since the early 80s or
Yes.
mid 80s,
Right.
30 years ago. So these weather patterns are really strange, but I have to give some credence to climate change. There's got to be something that we're doing affecting our planet.
There is something there. I definitely believe that there's some. Whether you're a conspiracy theorist with this whole it's a made up thing, or whether you actually believe that something's going on. I mean, one of the things that you have to look at that we can no party. I don't care if you're on the Republican side, the Democrat side. Doesn't really matter. There's something that we can definitely all agree on, that there's something going on. All right. There is definitely something. We have. Just here, we've had the craziest amount of rain just in this area. I mean, we haven't had rain like this in years.
You're right.
And it's just, it's crazy.
And like you said, on a partisan level between Democrats and Republicans, it's interesting how the GOP in general, a lot of them feel as if there's no such thing as climate change. It's not happening because it helps for deregulation. There's a lot of drilling and a lot of, environmental concerns that people have that won't be addressed by big businessmen who want to make as much money as they can.
Absolutely.
And I believe in environmental regulation. The Environmental Protection Agency has recently been scaled down. They're cutting their funding. So when you look at the Democratic Party, which is definitely more liberal, they're all about trying to save the environment and do as much as they can to reduce all of the emissions and the damage that we're creating. I feel like there's a median. There's got to be some sort of agreement that they can come to. But I guess, like you said, they call it politics for a reason.
Absolutely, absolutely. And one of the last hot topics we're going to talk about this day is, I don't know if you'd looked at the news lately, but they were just talking Beyonce Knowles. So
Really?
Jay-Z's wife, her father was just diagnosed with breast cancer. And, as an African-American male, when I heard this was crazy to me, because this is not something, I've never heard of that. I know this, with males, it had been, testicular cancer with Lance Armstrong, and obviously prostate cancer, those type things. Definitely if you are a male, make sure you get those that check. These are types of things, because traditionally as African-American males, we've not been quick to go to the doctor.
I haven't. You're right.
Right. So it's just one of those things. So I do definitely, if you're watching and you're of African-American descent, please don't be afraid of going to the doctor. Make sure that those are some things that you want to definitely talk to your personal physician and find out what it is, how we can do more to kind of help this cause and make sure that we're not affected by any of these stuff going on is cancer,
Yes,
because
sir.
it's a horrible, horrible disease.
Definitely. I thought personally, I thought I was invincible until I was well into my 20s. So, you know, regular doctor visits, checkups, all of the stuff that I do now, I wasn't thinking about doing because, you know, when you're young, you don't think that anything like that could happen. But cancer doesn't discriminate by age, gender,
Absolutely
race,
not.
anything.
Right.
And that's one of the leading killers of African Americans, especially.
Absolutely, absolutely. So this seems like we're going to jump into a topic that is getting ready to start onto another show. But my name is Gabe Monroe. I'm talking here with Sherman Oglesby, and we're getting ready to wrap this thing up. Thank you, Lake County, for watching us, and tune in next week.
We went from a welfare check to a woman being killed by the cops.
Outrage is building over the actions of a Fort Worth, Texas police officer. Saturday morning, just before 2:30 a.m., police were called to the home of 28-year-old Atatiana Jefferson after neighbors noticed her front door was open. Heavily edited body camera video released by Fort Worth police picks up what happens next. After police peer through the front door, they walk the perimeter of the property when suddenly, police say, an officer spots someone standing near a window.
Put your hands up! Show me your hands! Show me.
The medical examiner identified the woman who the officer shot as Jefferson. She died at the scene. James Smith says he's the concerned caller who first alerted police.
I feel guilty because had I not called the Fort Worth Police Department, my neighbor would still be alive today.